by leaving Tennessee, where he could have, over the course of the next year, 2 years, become one of the all-time great quarterbacks in Tennessee football history. Hello and welcome. It is always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Today is Monday, April 21st, and we appreciate all of you that are coming to the show, wherever it is you're coming to the show from, whether that's on the podcast platforms or you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. Please like, rate, subscribe, all the same old stuff that we always ask you to do. We have a fun show in store for you today. We're going to dive into a bunch of different things. We're going to begin by talking a little bit about the legacy of Lee Corso and the importance of Lee Corso. And while I'm coming at it from a television perspective, right? Like I work in TV, so there might be a part of you that would roll your eyes when discussing the importance of TV. I get that. But Lee Corso is above all else probably the greatest personality in the history of college football. I think it's a safe probably pedestal to put him on, given the fact that he was maybe the first person to ever go viral in the history of college football in so many different ways. So we'll talk about Lee Corso, his legacy. He, of course, if you're new and you weren't paying attention, he decided to retire. His final show will be week 1 of the 2025 college football season. We also had a bunch of transfer portal news that we have to get to here over the last 48 to 72 hours. We'll update you on what's going on with Nico Iamaleava. He's heading to UCLA. We also will tell you some of the fallout from that decision. And then we'll dive into a few other college football topics from the weekend. Spring games, a couple of maybe previews for some teams that had spring games this past weekend and why one I'm very bullish on. They wear maroon. The other, maybe I'm not quite as confident in, and they were nearly a playoff team just a year ago. So we will dive into some real up-to-date storylines, including Georgia's great transfer portal haul this weekend as well. So a bunch that we need to get to, but we'll kick things off with a little bit of a tribute to Lee Corso. Lee Corso, there are a few people that I can single-handedly point to and reference as a reason for my level of fandom. Most of which it probably has to do with a specific team, right? Most of which probably has to do with a specific instance. For instance, I love the Los Angeles Dodgers. That's my team. I was born in Los Angeles, didn't live there very long, moved to Dallas when I was young. So most of my sports idols are associated with the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But I can vividly remember being a fan of the Los Angeles Kings as a young kid, and my favorite player of all time was Wayne Gretzky, right? Doesn't require a whole – there were a few others too, by the way. Luc Robitaille, Yari Curry, a handful of others. So Kelly Rudy. So there were a bunch of people on that LA Kings hockey team that I loved. I moved to Dallas, was a fan of the Dallas Cowboys, favorite player of all time, Michael Irvin. Right. I mean, it was understandable. That was Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, Troy Aikman. I mean, those Deion Sanders. I mean, so I kind of grew up in kind of finding fandom with specific players. But there are very few people that have influenced my fandom that aren't on the team that I pull for. I can think of 2 off the top of my head. One is Dick Vitale. Like my appreciation for college basketball has been elevated significantly over the last 30 plus years because of the enthusiasm that Dick Vitale brings to a broadcast and the amount of one-liners and the amount of times I've seen him on television and how often I, as a 9 or 10-year-old kid, would listen to Dick Vitale talk about a diaper dandy. And now all of a sudden I want to go watch said diaper dandy, right? But the other would be Lee Corso. And I think back to when I was a kid and growing up in California, we didn't really follow college football very much. I mean, growing up in LA, I mean, you really, frankly, kind of picked a team, whether it was the 49ers or the Green Bay Packers with Brett Favre or whoever it might have been. You kind of picked a team because we didn't have one, but it was seldom about college football. My first, I guess, real consumption of college football when I moved to Texas. And I'm sitting there on January 1st of 1999, the first ever college football game that I attended with my dad. It was in the Cotton Bowl, and the Texas Longhorns were playing. And I knew from that moment, that instant, that I wanted to be a Texas Longhorn because I wanted to be like Ricky Williams. And then because of that affiliation, because of watching college football there in person for the very first time, I was all excited about the upcoming year and how Texas might be able to get better, and how the team that they were playing against, whether it was Arkansas or Mississippi State, whoever it may be, I was watching these other teams. So I was quickly introduced to College Game Day. And when I was 10 or 11 years old, right there on the cusp, College Game Day became my favorite show ever, and still continues to be for many, many reasons, most of which because of the enthusiasm surrounding Lee Corso. So I just want to say quickly, he's a colleague, and I have not spent a ridiculous amount of time around him, but when I have, he is a true gentleman. He is a true ambassador of the sport. And the sport would not be, in my opinion, the sport would not be as popular today if not for the contributions of Lee Corso over the course of the last 39 years. Stepping out at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. on College Game Day for all of us college football fans to consume his energy and enthusiasm. I think he's one of the best to have ever done it. He was one of the most exciting, and those last couple minutes of College Game Day every single week, oftentimes when I watch a pregame show, I'm anxious to flip the channel because my game might not be coming on right after that game, whenever that pregame show goes final. Like, I'm anxious to flip the channel. So if you're a diehard, say, Ohio State fan, and you're watching College Game Day, like, you're probably going to leave with 5 or 6 or 7 minutes to spare to go to whatever channel Ohio State was playing on. Well, that was really difficult to do, knowing that Lee Corso was going to put the headgear on with just 1 or 2 minutes to go. And it changed the way I consumed the sport. It changed the way people consume the sport. And I think he really, and I said this in the open, I think Lee Corso was the first viral moment in college football. And he had so many of them over and over and over again. They now live forever on YouTube and other platforms. But before social media, before we all consume things in 30-second segments, Lee Corso's headgear was that one thing we consumed on a weekly basis. So just want to say a tip of the cap to Lee Corso. Congrats on a tremendous career. We can't wait to watch your final show. All the accolades and all the things that are thrown your way are deserved. I wouldn't be in this situation. Your colleagues alongside you at College Game Day, I don't think would be in the same situation. I don't think the sport would be in the same situation if not for your contribution. So, Coach, we love you. We appreciate you. And we will always, always, always remember all the different great moments you provided us with over the last 39 years on College Game Day. Thanks, Coach. Moving on to college football today. And the big story over the last week or so has been what is going to happen with Nico Iamaleava. Now, everybody knows now that he has left Tennessee. He is now going to be heading to Westwood to be a part of UCLA's football program. And I think it's kind of amazing how this has kind of been handled in the court of public opinion, and how Nico's camp has been outspoken about making this a football decision. I completely disagree with that, by the way, but the chatter coming out of Nico's camp was that they were looking for assurances about them improving his weaponry on the perimeter at wide receiver, improving his offensive line. Like those were all the reasons why Nico was unsettled at Tennessee. I think it's ridiculous. I think this was purely about economics of the situation, because if you look at where he ends up leaving Tennessee. That was a playoff team a year ago. And yes, there were some pieces that needed to be replaced off last year's roster. But if you look at the portal additions, I think they adequately address some of those concerns. Because if you're going to cite the reasons and how uncomfortable it is playing for Tennessee and going into the season not knowing what it's going to be surrounded by, then how do you end up at UCLA? Like, you can't connect those two dots. You can't sit there and say, oh, this was a football decision, and then go to a place that was 95th out of 134 in yards per play, that was 126th in scoring, that ran for just over 3 yards a carry, and that allowed 34 sacks, which was 107th in college football. Now, I'll say this, new coaching staff, Eric Bieniemy, the OC from last year, he is now gone. In comes Tino Sinceri, but he's the first-time offensive coordinator from Indiana, and I love Tino Sinceri. I've known Tino Sinceri since he was a college player. I've been friends with Tino Sinceri's dad for 20 years. I think he's going to be a great coach. I love his personality. I love that he played the position. I love the style of offense that he's going to be inserting there at UCLA. But at the same time, you cannot possibly tell me that the UCLA situation is less cloudy than the situation that you had at Tennessee. That's absurd. Okay, that's absolutely absurd, especially when you look at the wide receivers that they have at their disposal. You got Mikey Matthews, who has played at Cal, who's played at Utah. You got Jaden Wilson, who's played at Arkansas. Those guys both are coming in. They're transfer portal additions. They might end up becoming incredible players this upcoming year for the Bruins. But in their career, they have 79 catches between the two of them. So it's not like those two guys are automatic, no doubt about it, improvements over what's been had there in quite some time. They also had to go out and get 4 offensive line transfers this offseason. So while the intentions of what UCLA are trying to do and to surround Nico and Iamaleava with, I think the intentions for UCLA are excellent. They're great. They're trying to go out and make their program better. But you can't, on any possible situation, explain to me the UCLA situation is better than the situation that you would have had at Tennessee. Now, many, many, many people have sit there and tried to explain why this was going on, why this had happened. And frankly, I didn't think he was going to end up at UCLA. Now, they were one of the teams that was referenced early on, but because of the situation with Nico Iamaleava's brother, Madden, who committed to UCLA for about half the year last year, half of the recruiting process, he was going to become a Bruin. Well, flipped on the first day of the early signing period and decided to go with Arkansas. And that was something that nobody really saw coming. So that kind of left people at UCLA surprised. And I thought, as a result, maybe Nico would be untouchable because of how the family handled the recruitment of Madden, which I think is intriguing because we've now found that teams are willing to overlook a lot in order to improve their roster right now. So that is one area that is extremely interesting. Another one, did Tennessee's supporting cast actually impact Nico's decision? No. This was, every single person that I've talked to said that this is purely a leveraged play. This was a decision that was based entirely around economics. And I think as a result, Nico Iamaleava's team overplayed their hand. As a result, he's taking a considerable pay cut. Now, people have speculated that it's around $1 million. I don't know that for a fact. I can't confirm that or deny that. I don't know exactly how much it is, but I do know this. Regardless of the money that was left on the table for 2025, how much money will potentially be left on the table as far as lifetime earnings are concerned? Because yes, okay, I understand. I can look at a contract and what it's worth today. I can see that 2.5 million is $1 million more than 1.5 million. And by the way, that was the alleged value of his contract at Tennessee versus his alleged contract at UCLA. I can see that there's $1 million there. And while, hey, I know he lost a bunch there, how much did he lose by leaving Tennessee, where he could have, over the course of the next year, 2 years, become one of the all-time great quarterbacks in Tennessee football history? Like, that's the value that people right now, these college players and the people around them, that's what they're not thinking about. I've drawn this picture on multiple different occasions for a lot of people in trying to make sure players understand that the money earned today is not a tangible asset compared to what could be made down the road. Let's think about Isaiah Bond for a moment. Remember Isaiah Bond? He was at Alabama 2 years ago. Isaiah Bond went out against Auburn in the 2023 season and made one of the great plays in the history of Alabama football, one of the most legendary plays in the history of the Iron Bowl. 4th and 31 conversion. He catches it in the back left corner of the end zone. Touchdown, Alabama. They survive and ultimately go on to make the college football playoff. That catch has been immortalized by Alabama fans and many by art. People are drawing paintings of it. People are profiting off of that. You know who's not profiting off of that? Isaiah Bond. Because Isaiah Bond, after the fact, went from an Alabama legend where he'd never have to pay for another drink in Tuscaloosa the rest of his life, and probably would have had many opportunities to potentially make money because of having participated in that play. Instead, he leaves to go to Texas the following year, and now Alabama wants nothing to do with him. That's how much money was potentially left on the table. Okay, yeah, you can't measure it. You can't put a price tag on it right now, but yes, well, maybe $1 million was lost by Isaiah Bond, or $1 million was lost by Nico Iamaleava, or gained, in Isaiah Bond's case, he made more at Texas than he would have at Alabama. But because he left Alabama, he now no longer has earning potential in Tuscaloosa. What kind of money was left on the table by Nico Iamaleava? Had he gone out, had an incredible year this upcoming year, made the playoffs, made it to New York as a Heisman Trophy finalist, and graduates as an all-time great Tennessee quarterback, what would that contract have actually been worth? There's no telling. But I would imagine it's significantly more than what could be earned at UCLA. So you catching my drift there? Yeah, we could talk about the NFL and the NFL prospects, and maybe he goes on to become the first overall pick. And I certainly hope that for Nico. I hope that happens. But people are walking away from good situations where they could have a lifetime of earnings from one specific school in favor of the, hey, I got to get mine today. And ultimately, that's a very short-sighted viewpoint, especially when taking into account what Nico could have been, or what Isaiah Bond could have been, or what several other players could have been for their school had they just stayed put for a little bit longer. Moving on to some other guys that are currently in the portal. We will start with one of the headliners from this past weekend. That is Steve Angeli. Now, it was a hard-fought three-way quarterback battle there in South Bend throughout the spring. And Steve Angeli, he's a senior. He's been around the program for a while, has great comfort within the program. He has decided now after the spring to enter the portals. Had a decent career up to this point, has thrown for nearly 800 yards, has been around on a handful of different occasions in which he was needed as far as spot play was concerned, but no bigger than having to step in the Orange Bowl, where he takes the offense on a 6 for 7, 44 yards right down the field to kind of stop the bleeding in a game that was very one-sided there in the first half. Now, that poise that Steve Angeli showed kind of lit a fire under Notre Dame and sparked what was a really impressive comeback to win 27-24 and punch their ticket to the national championship. So as of this moment for Steve Angeli, we're not 100% sure exactly where he's going to go, but he is in line to go visit Syracuse, which will be something worth watching. And we'll talk a little bit more about Syracuse here in just a minute. But Steve Angeli, his skill set is not that dissimilar from a guy that played and threw it pretty well for the Orange last year, and that would be Kyle McCord. And if Angeli does end up there, that could be very, very interesting. Here's the thing with Angeli. He doesn't have the ceiling that a lot of guys have, right? He doesn't have a Nico Iamaleava ceiling. He doesn't have a CJ Carr ceiling. He doesn't have the mobility that a Kenny Minchie has there for Notre Dame. So it's understandable that maybe guys want to go with the slightly younger option with a higher ceiling, because in time, that guy can elevate where the program is currently at. With Steve Angeli, you kind of know what you're going to get. Pocket passer, super accurate, super poised, and a guy that you can win with. There are not a lot of guys in the portal right now that I've looked at, and I sit there and think to myself, yeah, I can win with this guy. There's a bunch of unknowns, if I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I've seen a lot of coverage of Jaden Rashada, who has a lot of talent, was a highly recruited prospect a couple years ago, but has since been to, I think, 4 different schools. Well, this upcoming school that he ends up going to, that will be his 4th. With Angeli, he's played, he's performed, and albeit his skill set is not going to blow you away because he's a physical freak, he can win you games by an intellect, accuracy, and poise. 3 very, very important qualities. So if I were looking at a guy and I had to have a starter for this upcoming fall, Steve Angeli would without question be at the top of the list among those names that are currently in the portal. Well, a guy that entered the portal for about 10 minutes and is now back at his school, that's David Stone, who kind of an interesting situation here, by the way. Okay, so David Stone is a defensive tackle that was a 5-star guy on Oklahoma's roster last year. He's a freshman, didn't have some ridiculous season last year. He had 2 tackles for a loss, but there's been a ton of buzz about the growth he's shown over the course of the offseason. Decides to enter the portal on Friday. As cooler heads prevail, he decides on Sunday that he no longer wants to be in the portal and that he is going to stay at Oklahoma. Now, what's interesting about this is that he grew up in Oklahoma City and was a diehard fan of the Oklahoma Sooners. There's been a ton of buzz, by the way, about some of the growth he's shown this offseason, the winter workouts, and how he's gained 15 pounds of bulk. Well, they say between 15 and 18 pounds of muscle. He looks leaner. He's quicker. That added bulk should lead to more explosiveness, and that he's a guy that is likely going to be a bell cow for them along the defensive line for the foreseeable future. I think people are kind of losing sight about what this whole boomerang means with David Stone and with Oklahoma. It's not a reflection of David Stone. It's not a reflection of Oklahoma. It's purely a reflection of the position that David Stone plays. Now, everybody, and I'm talking everybody in college football can stand to benefit from adding depth and quality and a high ceiling skill set at defensive tackle. I've been going back through it the last couple of weeks. I'm sure you guys have as well. Probably looking through the teams and the contenders and just kind of looking at the rosters and the depth charts and who needs what and who can improve where. And if there's one thing I've found, every single contender needs a defensive tackle. I'm not saying they can't play or take the field or win without one, but most cases they have 3, most cases they have 4, and in rare cases they have 5, but there's not a single team out there that would turn down a guy with multiple years of eligibility, with tons of upside, and the possibility to come in, not just help you now, but be a game changer in 2 years. So this was purely about David Stone testing the market, figuring out what that market looks like, because Texas, Ohio State, those teams with deep pockets are absolutely in the market for your position. He's got to try it. And it looks like things have calmed down a little bit. He's going to go back to Oklahoma where he can continue to develop as a potential difference maker for his hometown team. This is great. Purely a leverage play. I wouldn't overanalyze it, but it further points to the probably most desired position in the portal outside of quarterback is defensive tackle. There's just not enough. There's not enough good ones, and there's not enough teams that feel comfortable with their depth at that position. You can make a case for edge. You can make a case for left tackle on the offensive line, but based on my conversations, it goes quarterback number 1, defensive tackle number 2. And to be honest with you, I think people are just saying quarterback because of one quarterback can change the complete outcome of what your season could look like. I think as far as needs are concerned, most teams are pretty comfortable with their quarterback situation. Yeah, they'll bring one in if they feel like it can really help them or really improve their situation. But I don't know very many teams that are like, yeah, we're good at D-tackle, don't need one. I think defensive tackle might be the most valuable position in the portal. And if you were to get coaches to be honest about that, they might even admit that if you got them off the record in a closed room meeting. Well, the Georgia Bulldogs are off to a great start. Well, this weekend, they had a great day. They're off to a great start in the portal window. And it's weird for us to look at the Georgia Bulldogs and think, you know what, they could really use some help in a few places. It's uncomfortable for me. I'll admit, I look at Georgia almost every year and think, yeah, that roster's pretty sporty. They can go. They got plenty of dudes. But this year, for whatever reason, there's just a few more question marks than there have been probably in the last 5 or 6 years. And I think they enter into the season with a couple of key positions that need to be addressed. One being edge defender. Another being, I think, depth at running back would be something they would absolutely consider. And then I think if any time you can improve the defensive tackle, imagine that, then they would be open to improving that as well. Well, they addressed all three of those positions with a pretty solid portal haul over Easter weekend. We will start with what they brought in along the defensive line. And Josh Horton is a Miami transfer at defensive tackle, which is solid. Now, Horton was a big prospect a couple years ago. This was back in 2023. Played a little bit for Miami the last couple years, but he's big. He's physical enough to hold up in the trenches and should bolster the depth along the defensive line with multiple years remaining of eligibility. So I think that was a good get. But the biggest get for Georgia this past weekend was Elo Medozi. He is an edge defender from Army, and this is probably one of the more intriguing prospects that we've come across in the portal this season. He is 6'3", 245-pound edge rusher with 2 seasons of eligibility remaining. Do not discredit the importance of having multiple years of eligibility. That's huge. But if you look at where he was last year, 34 tackles, 8 tackles for a loss, 6.5 sacks, and 37 pressures. That would be top 5 in the AAC. But what makes it most intriguing is that we're only a few years removed from Medozi being 6'3", 195 pounds. This young man was a wide receiver just a few years ago. So as a high school player, their junior year of his high school, he was kind of trying to figure out, do I stay down the path at wide receiver or do I transition as kind of an edge perimeter defender? What's the highest ceiling for me? What's the future look like for me? And he decided to kind of stay on offense. He was recruited to Army as a wide receiver and then immediately switched over and played kind of a rover position and has now grown into his frame at 250 so odd pounds. And he's going to be a down in, down out edge defender that can breathe a little fire off the edge. So I think this is a fascinating prospect to keep an eye on. I think it's a great get for Georgia. It's a low risk get. And he's a young man that has clearly proven the ability to grow, to get more physical, to get stronger. And he'll have to continue to do that. But if he can, look out. He might be a difference maker, a gem that's been found by the Dogs here in the spring portal window. There's not many gems to be found this time of year, by the way. If Medozi could develop into one, that would be huge for Kirby Smart and his defense. And to address some of the depth concerns at running back, they go out and get one of the most proven backs in this portal window in Josh McCray, who is at 6'1", 239 pounds, kind of a big bruising thumper, to combine with the speed they have with their other backs, including Nate Frazier, who's a little bit more dynamic with the ball in his hands. McCray can be a bit of a thumper and can pick up those tough yards when they're needed. So a really good weekend, I think, for Georgia when addressing positions of need and making sure that they have depth at positions where they were just a tiny bit thin the last couple days. Moving over to Syracuse, they've been brought up once already. They, for the most part, I think, feel pretty good about their roster going into this upcoming season, but they are now going to be without one of the best wide receivers that they had last year, and that's Trebor Pena. Pena, who had 84 catches last year for 941 yards and 9 touchdowns. He was the leading returning receiver for the Orange, and he was a part of the team that went from 6 wins to 10 wins in year number 1 under Fran Brown. But it sounds like, much like what happened with the Nico Iamaleava situation, it sounds like Trebor Pena might have overplayed his hand just a little bit. And how do we find out? Well, we'll take the coach's word for it. Let's have a listen to Fran Brown making a radio appearance when discussing Trebor Pena's exit from the program.
Sometimes people be asking for an outrageous number, like, right? You're not about to make more than every coordinator and all. Like, man, nah, like, stop. I ain't. With all due respect to everybody in the country, to every wide receiver, to everybody that's doing all this stuff, like, if you want to make $2 million at wide receiver, that's to blow a homie over at Ohio State. Ain't nobody else making that money. Giving no wide receiver no $2 million, man, in college. Nah. That ain't me. I ain't doing that. I can't do it. Unless they tell me that we get a chance to have Travis Hunter, he could come back to college and he could come here and play for us, then he gonna get some of my check. But I ain't paying nobody $2,000 this year. Not to me. $2 million, whatever. I just say, yeah, we ain't giving nobody that.
Well, there's Fran Brown being refreshingly candid with how he's approaching his negotiations with his wide receiver. But here is the indicator here, okay? Everyone wants to talk about, well, a receiver at $2 million or whatever that is. It's absurd, right? It does feel absurd in many ways. I mean, it really does. Unless your program is one wide receiver away from potentially get over the top. Why do you think Trebor Pena right now is en route to Penn State to go take a visit? Because that roster is completely set and ready to go win a national championship. Fran Brown hit the nail on the head. To overpay a wide receiver when your program is still a bunch of pieces away from contending at that level of the sport, you don't do that. But if you're just that wide out away from potentially getting over the top, you write that check immediately. Look, I think wide receiver is a position that has changed drastically over the last 15, 20, 30 years. And it's happened progressively over the course of time. It's maybe been a little while, but it's happened. We have watched the receiver position go from being a dime a dozen position to now a super premier position. The premier positions in the NFL and in college were always this. It was always quarterback, right? We knew quarterback was a premier position. You can't win without one. So whatever it takes to get a quarterback, you have to do it. A left tackle for a very long time, super premier position. Had to have it because for a long time, quarterbacks lacked mobility. Now with the quarterback's mobility, left tackle is not quite as big as it once was, but still, there's a reason why tackles get drafted first, second, third, fourth overall in the NFL draft because it is a super premium position. We've also seen edge rushers in the past. Those are guys that can end the game, guys that completely alter what you do offensively. If you have a crazy dynamic J.J. Watt, T.J. Watt, Jared Verse type of edge defender, I, as an offensive coordinator, I have to completely alter my structure to make sure that defensive end, that edge defender, doesn't take over the game and ruin the game. Okay, so quarterback, left tackle, edge defender. I now think that you can add corner, which was always a premier position, but I think corner is now fifth as far as premier positions are concerned. I think wide receiver has gone beyond corner as far as premier positions. I really believe that because I look at what these guys are now making in the NFL. In some cases, $35 million a year. I believe that's where Justin Jefferson was. Jamar Chase is right around there. Like the highest paid receivers in the game are making, 2/3 of what the highest paid quarterbacks in the game are making now in the NFL. What does that tell you about how NFL GMs view the wide receiver position? It's gotten more important every single year over the last handful of years. So if you are a receiver away, you do whatever it takes to get that guy. But if I'm really looking at Fran Brown's situation this year, I'm acknowledging, are we better off putting that $2 million into a wideout? Or is the roster nowhere near ready to compete against the best teams in the sport? So we're going to take that $2 million, we're going to spread it out amongst other guys, we're going to get more depth, and we're going to get more quality at multiple spots as opposed to overextending ourselves at one position. So I think it's a way of potentially looking at what the expectation level for Syracuse should be this upcoming year, but also an acknowledgement from Fran Brown. And yeah, you know what? That position for us is just not quite as valuable as it might be for an Ohio State or a program that might be that one dude away from getting it over the top. Now, one position that is of ample significance, like we've talked about forever, is quarterback, right? We know that. And let's talk a little quarterback. Let's dive in, shall we? Let's start with Michigan. Michigan this past weekend, true freshman quarterback going in, and it's Bryce Underwood, man. We're all excited to see Bryce Underwood. He's the top quarterback prospect ever. You know, like all of this other stuff. I don't know where he is on the pecking order of all-time recruits. I don't know that. But I can tell you this, there are few that I was more excited about making sure I checked out than Bryce Underwood because of what he might mean to the Michigan Wolverines. And if you look at the overall performance, you're probably coming out of it feeling just the tiniest bit underwhelmed. Because if you look at every play but the last play or two of the game, it was kind of underwhelming. Going into the last play with about 15 seconds remaining, Underwood was 11 of 25 for 99 yards. Those numbers are not going to necessarily blow anybody away, right? He did have an impressive deep ball that was thrown about 100 yards downfield, but the overall efficiency numbers from Underwood weren't great until the final play of the game. And they go with the trick play, kind of a reversed flea flicker. He hits the tight end, Jalen Hoffman, wide open, 30, 40 yards downfield. He catches it 88 yards out the gate to improve his stat line to 12 of 26 for 187. That looks a little bit better, right? Looks a little bit better. But people are kind of pointing to, well, look at the misses. Look at the inefficiencies. I'll tell you this, guys. He's a true freshman. He's a true freshman. And these moments of greatness and these moments in which you're left kind of shaking your head, they're completely expected. Nothing about his performance was surprising. It wasn't disappointing. It wasn't to the point where I'm giving him the Heisman Trophy, but I wasn't disappointed in how he played. Because if you look at what he provided the position, knowing that he is a threat to run, if he can do it, I'm not saying it's something he's going to do a lot of, but he is a threat to run. His mobility is something you have to account for. The arm talent is something that everybody strives to get. He's already, even at 11 of 25 for 99 yards, if you remove the last play of the game, he's already significantly better than any option they had last year. So I feel pretty good about Michigan's quarterback situation going into the fall. And think about this too. He's had 15 practices, right? Well, between now and when we see him at the end of the fall and he suits up in week 1 and week 2 and week 3, he's going to be a completely different guy because he's going to have 2 months of reps and 7-on-7, drop back passing, working on his rhythm, working on his anticipation, his reads, all that stuff. He's going to have 2 months of breaking that down. And then he's going to have another 15, 20, 25 practices in fall camp. So he might be twice the player in 3 months that he is right now. So I've remained super bullish on Underwood. And even though the first 3 quarters and change of that performance was somewhat underwhelming, I don't care. I'm excited about the upside. I'm excited about the potential. And also, too, the way Michigan breaks up their team, he didn't even have most of his best weapons out there alongside him for the blue team. Like, he was out there with guys that I wasn't really as familiar with. Some of the guys on the other team, yeah, I know those guys. Those guys are going to be pretty good. So take the performance with a grain of salt, but just know I think Michigan's quarterback situation will be in good hands at some point here in the future. But it leads to a bigger question because we've heard the scuttlebutt. We've heard the conversation about starting Bryce Underwood, and it leads me to a bigger point. Why is it that fans and analysts in some cases, and I mean anybody that covers the sport, why is it that there is such a strong push for true freshman starting quarterbacks to be the starting quarterback? Like why is that? Because if you look at Bryce Underwood's performance from this past weekend, I think that performance is reason 5,000 on why playing a true freshman quarterback is an extremely dangerous game. Yes, there were moments in which you're like, wow, what a play. I couldn't do that. I don't know anybody that could do that. What a throw. That was amazing. And then there are moments you're like, ooh, boy, that was not good. That was a bad read. Those were bad feet, bad eyes, bad accuracy, intercepted. The gap that you get, by the way, it's expected, with true freshman quarterback play is as wide as any other position that there is in the sport. Those moments of incredible throws, incredible decisions, the accuracy, the things that are just off the charts. And there's moments where you're just left shaking your head. And I think us as fans, we seemingly forget those shake your head moments. Like when you think back to last year, how many moments were you watching DJ Lagway and thinking, that was a freshman moment? Well, you had him. You just don't remember him, right? That was at Florida. They absolutely happened. He's a true freshman. But for the most part, you remember the spectacular plays way more than you remember the moments in which you're like, that was bad. Be careful doing that again. There's a reason why there's only been one starting quarterback prior to Trevor Lawrence in 2018 to have been a true freshman that led their team to the national championship, and that was Jamel Holloway, who led Oklahoma to the national championship in 1985. Do you realize, though, that in 1985, do you realize how many passes Jamel Holloway completed en route to the national championship? I'll give you a moment just to think through that. How many completions did Holloway have for the Sooners en route to the national championship? He had 27 completions that year. He threw for a grand total of 608 yards and 6 touchdowns. So it's not like Jamel Holloway was being asked to make the decisions that these young guys are having to make today. The amount of processing and the amount of information and the amount of and the level of defense that are being disguised and just how cerebral the game has become, it's a completely different game than it was 40 years ago, which makes the performance by Trevor Lawrence in 2018 even more remarkable. And he had an incredible supporting cast, by the way, with Justin Ross and T. Higgins and an incredible defense that rushed the quarterback like crazy. So we have seen other starting quarterbacks that were freshmen that went out and did amazing things. Tommy Frazier took over in the 6th game. He was the first player to ever start for Nebraska. That was back in 92. He won 5 of his 7 starts, including top 15 wins against Colorado and Kansas. Peyton Manning won 7 of 8 in 1994 when he was a true freshman. Chad Henne at Michigan won 9 of 12 back in 2004. Matt Barkley was a starter in 2009. Christian Hackenberg at Penn State was the starter in 2013. Those guys were both 5-star prospects coming out of high school and quickly took over at their respective school. And we've seen a handful of others. You know, Deshaun Watson got playing time as a freshman. Jalen Hurts at Alabama. Tua Tagovailoa played in the final game of his freshman year in the national championship and did amazing things. Jacob Eason at Georgia was eventually replaced by another true freshman in Jake Fromm. JT Daniels was the starter at USC. Sam Ehlinger, Bo Nix. I mean, there's a bunch of true freshmen that have come in and been starting quarterbacks, and very, very few have done so without significant growing pains. And if you are sitting there with a program that has real aspirations of winning a national championship, competing for a national championship, starting a true freshman quarterback might work out perfectly. It might happen. It could be great. You could have the next Trevor Lawrence, the next Jamel Holloway. You might have that. That'd be amazing. And I hope you do, because I want to cover that guy. But in all likelihood, the true freshman's up and downs as he learns on the job will lead to a performance or two offensively that might not give you enough to win the game. And that loss might actually keep you out of achieving what your potential as a team might be. So just be mindful of that. That's all I'm saying. It's a word of caution. It's a word of warning, because I'm seeing it all over the country right now. All over the country, where a true freshman quarterback is supposedly lighting it up in spring and just saying, be careful what you wish for. Like I said, guy might be amazing, but if we play the odds, historically speaking, the guy's probably going to have some growing pains as he tries to figure out how to play college football at this level. Just a couple more before we get you out of here. And I do want to dive just a little bit deeper, kind of have an upon further review segment on Texas A&M and on South Carolina, because I do think there's a lot of reason to be pretty bullish on Texas A&M. I was curious to see at their spring game this past weekend. I wanted to see how Marcel Reed would handle the second year, full year with a ton of reps and a ton of build up. I thought he looked pretty efficient. They did have an interception that you'd love to see have him come back. But at the same time, man, there was reason to believe that Marcel Reed, maybe he has taken a step. I like the additions that they've made at wide receiver. And then more specifically, I liked what I saw from a defensive line that's having to replace a lot of key pieces. So look, we are not done talking about Texas A&M, because we're going to get to the point here pretty soon where we start evaluating these teams in depth, and that day is coming, maybe even as soon for A&M on Thursday. But I'm starting to think maybe they're that team that's a little under the radar that we should start paying attention to. That's all I'm saying. Might be time to think about the Aggies with their schedule the way it sets up. In case you were curious, they play at Notre Dame, but they don't play on the road in the SEC till the middle of October. So this team might be a team that you don't want to sleep on. And then on the other side of the coin, South Carolina, they played their spring game this past weekend. And last year was a remarkable year, I might add. I mean, South Carolina had a great year. There's so much to be encouraged by with what they did en route to almost making the college football playoff. A lot of people thought they should have made the college football playoff because they thought the game against LSU was so poorly officiated that South Carolina, had it been officiated a little better, they would have won the game, and then they would have parlayed that win into a great run. And who knows? I don't know. I don't play the what if game. I don't go back and try to figure out who did what wrong when it comes to the officials in that game. But I do know this. I do know that Shane Beamer and company have a lot of pieces to replace. And while I'm super bullish on the growth of Lenora Sellers, and I'm hopeful that Lenora Sellers' supporting cast at wide receiver will be significantly better, I am a little bit less optimistic about them being anywhere near as good on the defensive side of the football. Just the pieces that were lost on the defensive side, whether it's Kyle Kennard, Tonka Hemingway, Debo Williams, Demetrius Knight, Nicky Minwari, they lost 10 guys that were all pretty dang good players on the defensive side. I'm feeling a little bit less optimistic about them being able to do what they did last year again this upcoming season. I think there's going to be growing pains on the defensive side, and while Lenora Sellers might be great and the offense might be significantly improved, I don't think the defense has a chance to be quite as good, so they could take a step back, and as a result, the team might take a little bit of a step back. But we'll dive into South Carolina a little later in the week, so make sure you tune in here on Thursday's show. We'll talk a little A&M, we'll talk a little South Carolina, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the spring games from this past weekend. But that'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, to rate, and to subscribe to the show. We will continue to keep you posted as best we can on our social media site. That's Always CFB on both Instagram and on Twitter. So check us out there. Follow us there. You might get a little bit more up-to-date breaking news coverage on those two platforms. So highly recommend that. And of course, continue to check us out. We'll have another episode coming out a little later this week. And then we will start ranking teams, ranking players, ranking position groups here in the next week or so that you don't want to miss. So make sure you tune in. We're not going anywhere. Numbers continue to grow like crazy, and it's because of the support that you guys show the show. For all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.